Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
America's export of soybeans helps the U.S. maintain a positive agricultural trade balance. Nebraska contributes half of its soybeans for export. The protein and oil content in soybeans enhance the growing demand for higher protein diets. The Nebraska Soybean Board promotes research to develop new soybean varieties with higher protein and oil content for major agricultural markets. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, David Kohl discusses how global economies can affect agriculture in the U.S. Melissa O'Rourke talks about estate planning on the farm. Karen Genswein tells us about her research in animal welfare. And Elwyn Taylor joins us with a weather outlook for 2014. Because of the university shutdown over Christmas and New Year's, we produced this show ahead of the break, meaning our regular market analysis would have been outdated. In its place, we have a look at global and national economic issues and their effects on farmers. David Kohl is well known in agriculture. He's a professor emeritus at Virginia Tech and is also the president of AgriVisions, a consulting business based in Blacksburg, Virginia. He spent significant time in Nebraska giving several presentations across the state this month. We caught up with him at the Embassy Suites in Lincoln recently to discuss land prices, falling commodity markets, and the role outside economies play in U.S. agricultural success.
Well, it's real interesting. The global economy, particularly emerging nations, are very, very connected to the prosperity and wealth of our agriculture in our rural areas. And one of the things that we're starting to see is the BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and the KIMTs, South Korea, Indonesia, Mexico, and Turkey, which they represent 23% of the world economy, but they've been 53% of the world growth. Jeff, what we're seeing is they're actually slowing down. And directly and indirectly, it's having an impact on our commodity prices, particularly corn, soybeans, but eventually it's going to have an impact on oil prices and fertilizer prices as well.
I imagine they're slowing down for a variety of reasons, but is there any indication that that slowing down is going to turn around?
No. Matter of fact, it looks like, if you think about it, those nations have grown on average a 9.8% rate since 1998. They're currently growing at a composite of about 4.4%. I could really see they might increase to 5 or 6%, but they're probably going to come down into that range, particularly as those economies mature and as you'll have some societal changes occur in those nations.
Going into 2014, how do you feel about the U.S. economy?
Well, one of the things about the U.S. economy, she's basically been on steroids by the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve, by printing money and doing some of their quantitative easing and buying mortgage-backed securities, has basically put the economy on steroids to create the wealth effect. And what's the wealth effect? Every time a stock goes up in dollar in value, we spend 4 cents more because we feel good about ourselves. But the wealth effect is alive and well in agriculture in rural America, because every time land goes up or real estate goes up $1 in value, we spend 9 cents more. So one of the things is we're really going to have to watch the tapering back and the possibility of the rise of interest rates with the Federal Reserve, because it's going to impact the income statement and the balance sheets of our people in agriculture and rural areas.
With that in mind, ag land prices have been incredibly high now. Are we set for retracement of any kind?
It's real interesting. You look at Nebraska land values up over 50%, the past 2 years. That's not sustainable. It's actually a bubble, but you're not the worst. North Dakota is actually much higher than you. One of the things that I see, we're starting to come into an era where the margins are getting pinched, particularly over on the grain side. It'll probably take a year or two for the psychology to kick in, because you got to keep in mind 80% of all economics is behavioral, And so before that behavior kicks in, it's going to take 1 or 2, not necessarily crash years, but moderating the economy to come over and see a re-entrenchment. Particularly, it'll be cash rents first and then land values second.
You're talking about the psychology of the market or the psychology of the farmer?
Psychology of the farmer. And one of the things that you look at, every time a farmer makes an investment decision, it's not made off logic. 80% of the time it's made off emotion and behavior. But the markets are also impacted there, and that's why you get your wide swings in your economy and why you have such market variability.
As you said, grain prices are going to be tight, going to make break-evens tight in 2014. What's the potential floor? I mean, what's the worst-case scenario that you could see?
Well, I'm not a commodities
Right.
person, but you know what I'm telling people, in their cash flow projections? I'd take the range all the way from $2.75 a bushel right on up to $5 a bushel. And it's real interesting. Some of our farm record data finds that half of the producers' cost of production on corn is above $5 a bushel. And so if they don't have a risk management marketing program, Jeff, those farms could be facing some real negative type of margins. So I would say scenario planning with those various scenarios. And of course, we've got to watch the weather in South America, and of course, we've got to watch next year's growing season. But those are some of the range of possibilities that I could see. So scenario planning and cash flow and financing is going to be very, very critical.
I've been reading some of the notes of your talks around the state this week, and one of the things that pops out is working capital. You always mention working capital. Why is that so important right
Working
now?
capital, it's analogous to a linebacker on defense. If the running back breaks through the defensive line, then the linebacker's there to tackle the running back. And working capital is basically your backup, and everybody thinks that's just cash. No. It's assets that can be turned to cash without disrupting your normal operation. And particularly if you're buying land, or particularly if you're a growing business, working capital is critical. And I often recommend at least 33% of your revenues need to be in net working capital. That's assets that can be turned to cash without disrupting normal operation. And boy, this year, it's going to be very, very critical for both producer and lender to forge that relationship, go over those balance sheets to determine the working capital position.
Last year and this year, there's been so much difficulty trying to get a new 5-year farm bill passed. The political uncertainty that gives to agriculture and other export markets, does that have long-term consequences, do you feel?
Oh, absolutely. Matter of fact, all the government action is having long-term implications. You think about the debacle we had in Washington, D.C. this past fall, potentially could have taken 0.5% right off our GDP because people are uncertain. Farmers and ranchers are uncertain. And so one of the things is a farm bill is very, very critical. And the negotiations on those farm bill is going to be very, very critical as we not only go for 2014, 2015, but as we go out toward 2020. So it is one of those items that many producers, you can't manage the farm bill, but you can manage around it. And that's why many producers, I recommend this working capital and being very objective in your decision making to kind of manage around that uncertainty.
And finally, you go into 2014, cows are really expensive to buy. There's a devastating virus in hogs right now. Commodity prices are making break-evens tight. What's going to separate the top from the bottom as we go into next year?
Gee, Jeff, you outlined a country and western song gone bad there, but it's real interesting. I can go right back to 1995 data, and if you really look at what distinguishes the top level manager, first of all, they know their cost of production. They know it via enterprise so that they can actually shift enterprise and do various things to make sure that they know what's making them the dollars and what's losing them the dollars. I think the other element is to forge a strong relationship with your lender. And it's not about the lowest interest rate. It's about having that lender come out, go over your financials with you, also being there, in good times and bad times. And I think the other element that I think is very, very critical is surrounding yourself with good people. And we're coming into a time in agriculture where with the technology that we're using and with the uncertainty, you've got to have good people. And sometimes they're not family members, sometimes they're outside the family. So the people component, knowing your cost, and forging that strong relationship with the lender and focusing on working capital, that is a recipe that's going to work whether you're in good times or in difficult times.
Next week, we'll return to our regular market analysis as Roy Smith will join us to analyze corn and soybean markets ahead of the January crop report. Drought and high feed prices squeezed margins, then pushed them into the red for many cattle producers. Now, with better conditions, higher returns could be on the way. To help you make the most in 2014, UNL Extension's Ranching and Profitability Workshops begin January 6th in O'Neill and Ainsworth and will continue in 6 other locations over the next week. UNL Extension educator Berger explains the purpose of the events.
This is an annual set of meetings that we have each year, and to really just bring current information on issues that are affecting ranchers across the state. Of course, in the late winter of 2013, we were really thinking about the drought and how we were going to continue to manage that. With the good fall moisture that we've had here across the state, folks are really starting to think about now the possibility of restocking. And so we're going to have that be one of the major topics for this program. Dr. Kate Brooks, who's with UNL Extension, is going to be talking about the market outlook under current conditions and also some of the economics of restocking the ranch, looking at what we might do, either buying bred females, keeping replacement heifers, or maybe also looking at just keeping some calves back and backgrounding those to take advantage of some grass that we're going to have available versus going out and buying some bred females to take and utilize that forage.
In addition, UNL researchers will present information on feeding cows in confinement, discuss changes in health insurance options, and talk about managing weeds on ranges and pastures. There is a cost of $15 to attend. You can register with a local extension office, preferably a week before the date, for an accurate meal count. More information can be found on the beef website at beef.unl.edu. The 2012 Census of Agriculture has yet to be released, but from the 2007 numbers, we know the average U.S. farm operator is 57 years old. We also know the age groups above 57 are growing faster than those below it. At the recent Omaha Ag Outlook, held jointly by UNL Extension and Iowa State Extension at the Embassy Suites Old Market, Melissa O'Rourke from ISU presented on the common mistakes in estate planning. As you'll hear, a large percentage of farmers or ranchers have yet to start planning for the transition. We started our conversation with Melissa by asking what the average aged operator should accomplish or start to by his or her mid-50s.
Well, they should have done something, certainly. Being a university, we do various studies and we find that 60% of farmers have no estate plan in place at all. So I don't say that to make people feel good if they have done nothing, but they are not the Lone Ranger. Procrastination is the #1 problem that people have. So the first things we want them to do is start communicating with their family, get organized, get your materials together, get information about your assets, what you own together, and start talking about that, doing some communication, some goal setting, and start building your team of professionals if you haven't done that. Many people have a tax professional, but they may not have that legal professional who needs to assist them with estate planning. But you need to include other professionals, your insurance professionals, accounting, real estate professionals, spiritual guidance. All of those things are important.
For that large percentage that doesn't have anything done right now, what should their goal be through this process? What do they want to aim for?
What they want to aim for is to have a plan in place that is going to leave their family in a better position than they would be otherwise. So that in terms of what they want to have happen to their farm business, what they want to have happen to their farm assets and their personal assets is something that is set out and is clearly communicated to everybody. One of the things that I really emphasize, though, as we talk about the whole farm estate planning and transition planning process, is that we don't want to have secrets among family members. We want to have a legacy of communication, of goal setting, of talking about what our goals are for the future and what we would like to see happen, not just with the assets of the farm, the land, the livestock, the equipment, but what do we want to have happen with that farm business and what should happen to that in the future.
Are there common things or areas where farmers get confused more so than another? I mean, are there common problem areas?
One common problem area that I see among farm families that have the family farm, the family business, is thinking about how to divide things up. And oftentimes there are maybe certain people in the family that are involved in the farm and others that are not. And people need to consider that whole aspect of, is dividing everything up equally going to be fair? And think about that aspect of fair versus equal. That's one of the most common problems that I see in farm families.
I'm wondering if you have a common question that you get, because you said you do a series of these meetings across the state of Iowa. Is there something that more often than others maybe people come up to you and ask?
I'm going to tell you the number one question that I get after I do an estate planning seminar is people saying, I don't have an attorney. I don't know an attorney that can do that kind of work. And out on our Iowa State website, Ag Decision Maker, there's an article that I've authored that's a set of instructions of how to find an estate planning attorney that can work for you. And it's a whole series of getting recommendations, interviewing that person, a set of questions. That's the number one question that I get. I suppose the second question is this question of, how do I treat everybody in my family fairly, and does that necessarily mean equal? For that, we have some other resources, but it depends on the family. It depends on the situation, because every family is different. But I want every family to think about that question.
As Melissa mentioned, she authored an article on finding an estate planning attorney who can work for you. We'll link to that article on the Market Journal homepage. The December Nebraska Farmer says Nebraska's property tax burden continues to have a negative financial impact on the state's farmers and ranchers. Matt Yedlichka, who farms in Colfax County, provides several examples in this month's issue. Yedlichka says property taxes have tripled within 10 years on his dryland corn in Colfax County and more than doubled in the last 5 years. He and other ag interests recommend property tax relief and a broadening of the sales tax base. You can read 3 articles on the state of farmland property taxes in Nebraska in the December Nebraska Farmer. From our recent discussions on the use of beta agonists in the feedlot sector and cattle handling and stress, it's very apparent animal welfare has become an emphasized point between producers and consumers. Karen Genswein is a research scientist in beef welfare and behavior with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. At a recent beef nutrition conference at the ARDC in Meade, we sat down with Karen to discuss her research on animal welfare and first asked her how animal welfare should be defined.
So to me, as a scientist and working applied work with producers, welfare means the state of the animal as it attempts to cope or not cope with its environment. So if an animal is not doing well, that means it's not, something in that environment is causing it to not cope, and so there's increased stress, there's increased reduction of immune function, so increased sickness, those types of things. And so you can really see that in the animal, and it's what some of our feedlot staff and the pen checkers do on a daily basis, is go and to look for animals that aren't coping well with their environment.
The industry is certainly putting perspective and emphasis on it now. How long has that been in place? I mean, how long have we been cognizant and really aware of animal welfare?
I would say so. I'm dating myself, but I got 17 years ago when I got my PhD, it wasn't on the radar, not like it is today. So I would say over that 17-year and more so in the last 10 years, it's really grown. The industry is very cognizant of it. Sometimes they don't always know how to handle it or how to deal with it, how to look at it or measure it or get to it, or what issues are the pinpoint issues for consumers, but they're really starting to now. And they now come to me saying, Karen, can you help us on these issues, and we need to look into this more. And so it's really improved over that time.
So how do you measure it as a scientist? How do you measure animal welfare?
Yep. There's mainly 2 ways, well, only 2 ways that I know of and that I use daily in our research facilities and trials. So we look at the behavior of those animals and we look at the physiology of those animals, and we usually should always look at the combination of those. So I'll give you an example of behavior. We can look at things like their standing and lying and walking, what their time budgets during the day. If you're looking at a stressor like dehorning, for example, you could look at comparing how much the animals shake their head before and after the procedure as an indicator of pain, for example. And then you would pair that with physiological measures such as cortisol, which is a stress hormone. You can look at immune function indicators, which, like I said, goes down in when the animals are stressed, it reduces immune function. So white blood cell count, neutrophil lymphocyte ratios, heart rate. Depends really. You have to match the measurements, so the behavior physiological measurements to what type of stressor or pain you're looking at.
You mentioned dehorning. What are some of the other major welfare issues that you're currently looking at?
Right, so I kind of put them into categories. So those that cause pain, so castration, dehorning, tail docking, if that doesn't happen much in the beef industry, but those are some of the things we could look at. More management type of things, so weaning, stress is a big one, transport and handling are big. Lameness now is, I think we really need to look at it. It's obviously been viewed as much more of a dairy issue, but as we look into the feedlots, we see a lot of lameness, and so we need to kind of have a better handle on that. And then environmental factors, so how our housing, how our weather conditions, so heat and cold stress, mud conditions in the feedlot, those would be the major concerns.
What are the advancements that the industry has made, whether it be in those areas or other areas when it comes to welfare?
I think there is a lot of emphasis on improved handling, and mostly, I mean, I think if the producers have the education, we can extend that information back to them. They do adopt it. I think there's a lot more producers that are asking me about pain mitigation and wanting to incorporate it into their management. So I get a lot of calls from cow-calf people saying, look, you have, what drugs do I use? When do I give it? So I think that the adoption of those things are really starting to take place now, and I see a large turnover with kind of the newer generation of producers, and the progressive producers are really trying to incorporate some of those things.
Since the university is closed down for winter break, we're unable to give you an updated weather forecast this week, but we do still have a weather component. At last week's Soybean Day and Machinery Expo, we talked with Iowa State's Elwyn Taylor to get his thoughts on what we could experience in 2014. Just give me an outlook of what you think the rest of winter might look like.
Already we have seen 3 outbreaks of polar air. Usually for the whole winter we get 3 or 4. On a mild winter, if it's a harsh winter, we might get 7. We're on the track to get 7 polar outbreaks. Don't expect it this week. Maybe just after Christmas, be ready for another outbreak of sub-zero temperatures.
Does that mean it's above or below normal, or is that right on average?
That'll be below normal during that several days that we've got the high pressure from the Arctic here. And then it will get amazingly warm in between, and we'll get the next one. That's how we call a harsh winter. Sometimes it has extra snow because of warm to cold. Sometimes it has extra wind because of the switch from warm to cold. Always, we hate the cold when it goes to 20 below zero, especially when it's just been 50 degrees.
Now, how do you think we'll enter planting season this year? Obviously, Iowa was punished a little bit with a little too much rain last year, but what do you think 2014 spring will look like?
Right now, we can't tell the spring, and winter doesn't give us much indication. But we do have some indication that we'll be getting more than the normal number of precipitation events. That should be able to replenish the subsoil moisture that was pretty much diminished during the last couple of months of the growing season in 2013.
Can we tell yet whether or not 2014 would be an average precipitation year or severely below like in 2012, or what point in the year can you tell that?
You normally can't tell until the summer pattern has established, and often that is late May when the things are really in place. I like to tell people the earliest we can tell is the first day of spring, which is as we get into the end of March. And so sometimes then we can see what the early summer pattern will be, and definitely the spring pattern. And sometimes you really don't know. But for the most part, we could tell that last year was getting wet, and it was going to stay wet until summer came, and then it went dry, and it did as expected. So occasionally we can tell that, but mostly we can just see the tendency, and there will be a tendency this year, at least as of now, to start off a little bit moist and to stay on the variable side slightly. So a little bit to the dry side, but still could give us an above average crop yield by a small margin.
2012 was obviously an extreme year. In your opinion, is that going to be something we see a lot happening in the future, the volatility of the climate?
We think 2012 was the first of the volatile years that go on for 25 years. The volatile years are both like 2012 and way up to record high yields like 2008 had. And so we'll see more of that ups and downs during the next 25 years than we have in the past 18.
So not necessarily consistently dry or consistently wet, just back and forth.
Back and forth, extreme years.
Today you were talking about growing degree days a lot and how producers can use them to better find out what the crop will look like. Explain a little bit more on that to me.
The growing degree day is one of the first ways to use temperature in evaluating what's going to happen to our crops. But we don't use it as much as we really should. We might use it for when to plant a hybrid or when to spray for insects, and that's a good use, but its real value is when will the crop mature, how much weight will it put on before it matures. That's the value of the growing degree days. If they're falling behind normal after pollination, that is usually adding to our yield. That's the first thing people should keep in mind.
And finally, how can producers keep an eye out on the weather? What could they look at maybe to just give them a hint of what might happen a month out? Is there anything they can do or keep an eye on?
If you want to know what is going to happen a month ahead, you are pretty much looking at things like El Nino and La Nina, these long-term things, because the National Weather Service outlook is now they have a 15-day outlook, and it's pretty shaky. You're almost better off just look at the trend. If it's El Nino dominant, that the trend will be on the favorable side. If it's La Nina, that the trend will be unfavorable. That's the best we can do right now beyond 2 weeks.
Al Dutcher will return next week with his weekly weather forecast. Today's interviews with David Kohl, Melissa O'Rourke, Karen Genswein, and Elwyn Taylor are available individually on the Market Journal website and through our mobile app as part of the December 27th episode. Next week, Roy Smith will be our marketing analyst, and IANR Vice Chancellor Ronnie Green will also join us. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
A diesel-powered engine on a farm works hard and operates in a grueling environment. Soy biodiesel fuels stand up to the challenge of powering farm equipment, but are also renewable and environmentally responsible as well. The Nebraska Soybean Board is committed to encouraging the use of soy biodiesel to protect the environment and sustain Nebraska's agriculture. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.